The capitalist mode of production and never-ending pursuit of profit are sooner or later going to cause the downfall for all of humanity. It is only with socialism that we can prevent this. Though many comrades will put forward better living conditions, higher productivity, and actual power for the population at large as arguments for socialism, these are all irrelevant when faced with the undeniable fact that capitalism is literally destroying the world. Today we will look at a short overview on just some of the many imminent dangers to humanity, either made possible through capitalism or simply amplified to the point from which it cannot return. Socialism is not an option. The topics we're covering include the profit made through war and turmoil, starvation as well as artificial scarcity, and fighting economic interest to solve global problems. You can skip to each topic in the description. Capitalism is a system with the philosophy of a cancer cell. Growth for the sake of growth. This is also growth at no cost. And so we see today both governments and private organisations go to horrific extents to perpetually make profit gains. To see properly the main example of this today, we can look at the Middle East and derive one main point. Turmoil is more profitable than harmony, and capitalists are willing to destabilise regions in order to abuse this and make profits. We can see this from things like selling arms and manipulation of oil prices. So where is this idea coming from? Well, to reach this conclusion, we only need to look at a series of events and show the economic results for those that caused them. Keep in mind, this is also only one specific example, and it's something that has been practiced in many other regions in the world. During the 1970s, while Russia was invading Afghanistan, the US government funded and trained Islamic militants in the area to help rebel against the Russians and push them back. These militants later became what we know today as Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. During the 1980s, both the US and UK governments played roles in supporting the rise of Saddam Hussein, as well as supplying him with arms and chemical weapons. Later in 2003, they overthrew him with no replacement. From 2000s and onwards, ISIS has been funded indirectly in a number of ways by Western powers, including ISIS being able to take abandoned military equipment left over by ground forces such as weapons and Humvees, which the original owners of this equipment knew about and yet did nothing to stop or prevent this from happening in the first place. As well as this, the US has sent a total of over $500 million to the Free Syrian Army, which is known to be one of the biggest suppliers of weaponry to ISIS. It would seem that we were perpetually arming one rebel group to fight the last rebel group that we armed. So assuming that capitalists are in fact intentionally destabilizing regions, how are they profiting? Mainly in two ways. Firstly, the production and selling of arms, and secondly, the manipulation of oil markets. Because of this destabilization, it allows the state as well as private companies to sell arms to different groups involved in the wars, which they would otherwise not be able to do with a stable region. In just 2014 alone, the US sold $32 billion in weaponry to various rebel groups and countries around the world. This is, however, just the US. Many other countries, Western or otherwise, also take part in selling arms. It is also quite well known that the West has a large interest in the Middle East due to its oil resources. However, it's important to know exactly how they're intervening with these countries, which creates profit. It's not simply, as a lot of people might imagine, gaining access to the oil supplies in the first place. They were already available in the global market. However, with occupation and the establishment of military bases, the West is able to control and manipulate how that oil enters the market to best suit their economical interests, in ways such as controlling the terms of oil contracts, controlling oil prices, and controlling the scarcity. It is shown to be a fact that wars make profit, so it is therefore difficult to give capitalists the benefit of the doubt in saying that all this conflict really has just been to try and help the people. How do we fix the Middle East by this point though? Simply bomb them all? Let the different opposing factions battle it out while tearing the land apart for their own power struggles? We've seen from history that boots on the ground and attempts to stabilise under such circumstances normally result in making the situation worse. The Middle East will bear the scars of these conflicts for decades to come and may truly never recover. Although it's just one part of the world, what happens when the capitalists can no longer exploit it for profit? They will move on again and again, ravaging entire swaths of the world for their own gain. This is how capitalism is literally destroying the world. The only reason this happens at all is due to profit-based society. It is only because there is money to be made and power to be gained from such atrocities to take place. If we wish to end the perpetual conflict, the fanning of the flames by the capitalists, we must put an end to capitalism and profit-based society. By looking at the total deaths caused by capitalism, we can clearly see that it is a very destructive ideology. Taking into account imperialism and conflicts caused by capitalism, the total deaths due to capitalism come over to 222 million people, and this is not including world hunger. Now of course I'm not claiming that there would be total peace under socialism, in fact far from it. However, there are two fundamental differences. Firstly, the violence would never be perpetuated because there would be no reason to do so, unlike under capitalism, so violence would only be used to end violence. Secondly, the people themselves would decide when violence is necessary. Socialism works on democracy, so the people themselves would decide when they want their country and their army to engage in conflicts. Unlike today, where not only these decisions are made by a small section of the ruling class, driven by the pursuit of profit, but even massive outcries from the population do not make a difference. And we can see this from the invasion of Afghanistan in 2002, where at least 750,000 people in the UK alone protested and begged for their government not to engage in war, yet they did anyway, showing how ultimately the working class under capitalism have no say in how the society is run or what actions take place. The existence of global capitalism and the constraints placed upon us by the force of capital is causing unnecessary widespread suffering across the world in various ways. One of the most prominent ways is through lack of food and water in developing countries, leaving around just under 1 billion people without enough food to live an active life, or 1 in 9 people in the world. We've always been told, or simply just assumed, that this is how things were, that due to historical circumstances out of our generation's control, that these parts of the world were simply condemned to rely on the support of charity to relieve their symptoms. Yet, we have the ability to cure world hunger and always have. Going by Oxfam statistics, we currently produce 17% more food than is required to feed everyone. However, there are two main reasons this food isn't reaching people. Firstly, because it's simply not profitable to distribute food to these parts of the world when they have no money themselves to buy anything in the first place. How could anyone be expected to create any real market there? If a profit could be made by selling food to these places, it would have been done a long time ago. Secondly, though we produce a large abundance of food, profit-based society creates many inefficiencies that result in not all of this food reaching people. One of the main inefficiencies created by the pursuit of profit is artificial scarcity. This is where companies will either dump large amounts of their product, in this case food, instead of putting it onto the market. This prevents the prices of their goods dropping due to saturation of the market. Artificial scarcity applies to many other commodities, such as diamonds, which cause blood diamonds as we know them, and forced labour in parts of Africa to attain them. Diamonds are extremely common and serve no actual use to society out of a small amount needed for industrial drills. This market manipulation has been going on for almost 100 years now, and has caused large conflicts in diamond-rich regions of Africa, so that warlords can sell them to fund their operations. This has only been possible because the price has been artificially risen, and people in the West have been conditioned to believe that diamonds are a measure of a man's worth, and are an absolute necessity when proposing to get married, giving the diamonds value that they would otherwise not have. It is quite easy to explain how this would be under socialism. Without the constraints of profit, there would be no reason not to feed everybody possible, as well as no reason to waste large amounts of product or create artificial scarcity of any form, as there is no profit incentive to do so. This means a rise in the standard of living for almost 1 billion people, to the point where they can actually live a life, as well as a more productive and less wasteful society. Capitalism is slow to adapt and change in order to prevent possible problems arising in the future. This is due to clashes in economic interest and having to fight against it in every turn in order to change the system. When presented with situations that could potentially cause widespread suffering to humanity, economic interest will often stand in the way of reform. This is evident with two global issues set to cause many problems for everybody in the distant future, these being climate change and antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Let's talk about climate change first. This is a perfect example of how economic interest is slowing down progress to extremely slow levels, as there is currently a large debate on whether climate change is even real or not, with both sides claiming that if climate change were or were not real, it would economically benefit the other side. The time wasted arguing on if it is real or not has slowed down our ability to deal with the problem tremendously. If global warming is real, then we will already be seeing massive damage to parts of the world due to it. Even if we stop all CO2 emissions tomorrow, the temperature in certain parts of the world is set to rise by 0.6 degrees Celsius. While this is a small increase in temperature, it will have knock-on effects and cause colossal damage to developing countries, essentially destroying their food resources. While for now this temperature rise will only affect certain areas of the world, as we continue to do nothing, it will have huge impacts across the whole population of the Earth, and we refuse to stop it. Even if we act now, we have already caused irreparable damage, yet we will instead continue to argue, as actually taking action is against an economic interest. If global warming isn't real, and this argument is just a waste of time, then we are wasting our time due to economic interest in the first place. And how long until a real problem arises, in which we do not take action to solve due to economic interest, and therefore leave too late to solve? Personally, I believe this is already happening in the form of global warming, But even if you do not believe in global warming, you cannot deny that capitalism can accommodate for this scenario to take place. Another example of how economic interest is slowing down our progress to deal with large problems is antibiotic resistance. Currently, it is very possible that in a couple decades, almost all our antibiotics could be useless, and we would have to return to a time where cutting your finger and getting an infection would probably result in death. This is being accelerated in various ways, mainly through overprescription of antibiotics by doctors, as well as the fact that it is in the economic interest of pharmaceutical companies to sell as many antibiotics as possible. An extract from a journal talking about antibiotic resistance, which can be found in the description, outlines the problems that the pursuit of profit plays in this issue. Pharmaceutical companies discover, develop and market new antibacterials. Clearly, it is in the best interest of pharmaceutical companies to promote wide use of antibacterials in order to justify research and development costs. Big products produce big profits for companies and ensure the company's commitment to that area of medicine. This fact, coupled with the willingness of some physicians to prescribe the latest antibacterial, has undoubtedly increased the frequency of resistance. What this essentially makes clear is that it is in the economic interest for companies to accelerate resistance to antibiotics, so they do just that, though admittedly unintentionally. We are also seeing the effects of superbacteria today on small scales, and are already seeing how profit-driven society is going to create even more suffering that is simply not necessary. Developing new antibiotics is a process that many pharmaceutical companies do not like to do, as it shows a very low return rates and is in general not very profitable. As they answer to their shareholders, developing new antibiotics is simply not an option they can normally take. The problem with this is that there are some bacteria that exist today that are already resistant to almost all antibiotics we have available. In 2011 in America alone, 23,000 people died due to superbacteria, and the number increases each year. These deaths could be prevented, however, with the development of new antibiotics. However, none of these new antibiotics will get produced for a long time due to them not being very profitable. This essentially means that people are dying when we very much have the means to keep them alive and healthy, but we don't because our system does not accommodate for those actions to be taken. What's more though, is it's not even the pharmaceutical companies to blame for this. It is not up to them to sell more drugs that will bring an impending disaster even closer, or not to develop new drugs that could save lives, but rather they are forced to do so by the system of capitalism. If these companies did not make profits in every way they could, other companies would and eventually outcompete them. This is capitalism in its simplest form. They are forced to take actions that are detrimental to society because if they didn't, their own livelihoods would be ruined. It is again quite simple to explain how this would be different under socialism. Without capital and profit holding us back, we would be free to act against these global disasters that threaten billions of people across the world, as well as take every action required to save as many lives as possible. We would be able to adjust the problem as soon as we discover it, without having to concern ourselves with conflicting economic interest. Now that it is clear that the pursuit of profit will stop at nothing, and will long ravage our world in many ways before ceasing on its own accord, our main question is how do we stop capitalism and attain socialism? The answer is revolution via external force. While violence is always the last resort, we must not hold back from making use of it when our only alternative is asking the capitalists nicely to give up their power, ensuring the prolonged existence of capitalism, and with it, the destruction of our world. To quote Lenin, "We must not depict socialism as if socialists will bring it to us on a plate all nicely dressed. That will never happen. Not a single problem of the class struggle has ever been solved in history except by violence. When violence is exercised by the working people, by the massive exploited against the exploiters, then we are for it." Capitalism itself was brought about through violent revolution, when the monarchs were forcibly removed from their position of power, and to assume that history will remain static is simply ignorant. However, it is clear that capitalism will destroy the world before it falls under the weight of its own contradictions. It is up to us, the working class and the masses, to save ourselves from the almost masochistic machine of capitalism through any means necessary. Thank you for watching.